I got you.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. And I have another fantastic guest with me today. I don't know how I keep finding these wonderful people. Her name is Dana Skaggs, and she is a licensed psychotherapist who is also known as the sassy psychotherapist, who has the courage to say out loud what others will only think. Dana is also called the Boundaries Queen because of her extraordinary skill at helping people understand how the lack of healthy boundaries contribute to their problems. She has been in private practice for over 15 years, specializing in anxiety and adjustment issues, along with trauma work. She has taught classes on boundaries at her church, which led to the development of creating and launching her podcast called Phoenix and Flame. Dana, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you so much for having me. This is going to be fun.
Well, we already had a good time before we set the recording,
Yes,
so
we did.
let's continue. How did you end up in the field of mental health? That's my first question. And then how did that eventually turn into you opening your private practice?
Okay, that's a really good question because it kind of gets back to my story and also why I'm so good at boundaries. I think naturally, the way I analyze behavior, I think that's just part of how my brain functions.
Mhm.
But I was raised in a pretty good environment, but my mother struggled with some mental illness,
Mhm.
fairly significant, and several of them, not just one. And
Mhm.
it created a scenario that was sometimes very normal, much like
Mhm.
someone who would have a parent who's an alcoholic,
Mhm.
where when they're not drinking, they're just fine. Everything's fine. But when they're
Mhm.
drinking, everything goes to hell in a handbasket. And
Mhm.
so I was raised in kind of an environment that way where you had this inconsistency, where you had a lot of love and you had a lot of nurturance and support. And then you also had times where, you're getting cussed at, things are being thrown at you.
Oh.
And there was also a lot of like enmeshment.
Mhm.
The boundaries were not good at all. And
Mhm.
so looking back, I really feel like I was drawn to the field of psychology because there was really two layers there. One layer was how to protect myself,
Mhm.
that there was this feeling that if I could figure it out, then I could protect myself. If I could get ahead of it, if I could watch the behavior going on and figure out what was going to happen, then I
Mhm.
could protect myself before it happened.
Mhm.
And so that was part of it. And I think another part of it, really looking back, was a desire to help my mother, to possibly fix her, to
Mhm.
find some information that would help her because she was struggling mightily and still does with these
Oh.
issues. And so I think that's what drew me to psychology. And then the more I took the classes, I learned that I was very good at it. I had started out actually in physical therapy, which I still say to this day is an excellent choice for a job, but it wasn't mine because I started out in I'm not going to joke. I could walk by the chemistry building and my grade point average starts dropping. I mean,
Mm.
it's just crazy. I was not good at it. But when I switched over to psychology, everything felt like breathing. It
Mm.
was just so natural, and my brain just naturally connected all the dots and understood everything so easily. So I just kind of kept going in that area and
Mhm.
ended up eventually in private practice.
Mhm. Well, I certainly feel your pain about the chemistry building. I still have a little bit of, residual anxiety over that. Biochemistry just kicked my butt the first time
Oh
around,
boy.
but then I had to take it again. My first career was respiratory therapy, and my second
Oh.
career, yeah, I fell into that. Trust me, I did not pick it. And I did it for 17 years.
Oh,
But
wow.
it's really interesting because I was never a good student. I was always the one who just barely squeaked by. I was the one who was always looking out the window going, I would rather be out there doing anything else but sitting here in this horrible classroom being bored to death. And then when I ended up going to college, and my first semester was a nightmare, the second one was better, but then the third one was like, oh my gosh, we started really getting into the anatomy, the kinesiology, and I wasn't even a PT at the time. All of these things, that the pulmonary system and physiology was so fascinating. So the biological sciences were really my jam. So I just excelled in that area and barely squeaked by the physics and the chemistry, even though it was a seriously watered down version of it. And then I ended up going to PT school, 20 years later. And yeah, it was a challenge when it got to the physical stuff.
So you're a physical therapist? Or
yes.
I'm awesome.
I'm a respiratory therapist and a physical therapist. So I call myself a therapist squared.
Oh, that's awesome. And that's really amazing to be both. I mean, you were kind of asking about the progression of my vocation, and there was a time where I worked at a rehab unit. I was part of a multidisciplinary team, and very, very familiar with on our team respiratory therapists, occupational therapists, physical therapists.
Yeah.
Then you had the nursing, and we all kind of worked together to try to help these people get back to their lives and overcome whatever it is that they were facing. So
Right.
I did a lot of work with PTs, OTs, speech and respiratory therapists and all that kind of thing.
And you're probably an honorary therapist in every single one of those disciplines, just, through association, because you do learn so much when you are collaborating with other professionals. It's amazing how much, cross therapies or cross treatments there really are. So you do learn an awful lot. But I was in that same situation after graduating PT school, was in long-term care and, acute rehab and long-term rehab. I did that for about 2.5 years until finally I said, I can't do this anymore. I really, really hated traditional PT. That's why I was smiling when you said PT is a great career for anybody. I'd highly recommend it. And that's when I opened up my own practice. So it's interesting.
It is a wonderful, physical therapy, because you can do so many things from birth to death. There's so many different inpatient, outpatient. I mean, it's just I still stand by that. And but it just wasn't, my brain just would not. You want to hear a funny story about this?
Oh, I love funny stories.
Okay. So when I was going to one of my anatomy and physiology classes, and I walk around the corner, and of course you're in the building, it kind of smells faintly of formaldehyde all the time. Okay. So I'm rounding the corner to my class, and I see that they had these big, huge windows. It was an old building, and there was a chair sitting in the hallway next to the window, next to an open window. And I thought, well, that's strange, but I'm like, okay, whatever. So I went into class. Well, I found out later why the chair was there. We were doing like centrifuge. He had us, the professor had us broken up into partners, and we were taking each other's blood and putting it in a centrifuge to divide out the blood plasma from all that. And I'm standing there trying my best to be the good student and do my thing and follow the rules. And my partner looks at me and he goes, you don't look good.
Was it that green skin tone that he was noticing?
Yes. That very, very pale, yeah. Well, all your blood is just drained out of your face. And he said, you probably need to check with the professor. So I walked up to the professor and I said, I've been told to walk up here and say something to you that I'm not doing so well. And he looked at me and he goes, okay, do you pass that chair in the hallway? And I said, yes. He said, that's for you. Go out and sit in that chair next to the open window with the breeze blowing in. So I learned that should have been like, here's your sign,
yeah.
get out of that field.
Well, that's so funny, but I have to tell you a funny story. So when I was in college for respiratory therapy, we had 2 years at the small state school in the center of Pennsylvania. I'm originally from Western PA. So we had 2 years there doing the prereqs and all that kind of stuff. And then the next 2 years was at this huge teaching hospital in the middle of Pittsburgh. It was the first hospital that was ever built in Western Pennsylvania. It was called the West Penn Hospital. And I'm a huge teaching hospital. Now think about this. I was 19 years old and I had no idea what a respiratory therapist did. it was kind of like a field that my mom and one of my sisters picked for me. So there I was after 2 years of college looking at, I can't even articulate some of the things that I had to do, but it was so shocking and so disgusting. I can't believe I never passed out or threw up. And there were 20 of us. So it was a really small class of respiratory therapists. And we just clung to each other, like, for the first couple of months going, oh my God, why didn't somebody tell us this is what it was going to be like? It was critical care, it was ventilator management, it was life support and resuscitation. And oh gosh, I think about that. And it was like, how did a person who was supposed to be doing really lovely things, like maybe selling Estee Lauder, end up doing this?
And you did it for so long.
I
You were a
did.
respiratory therapist for a long
I
time.
did. And once I got over the shock, I realized not only was I really good at it, because I did love, the cardiopulmonary sciences, and I loved the physiology, and I really loved helping people. And, I had a streak of compassion that I was also able to kind of like step back and have that clinical distance, which you really need when you have to deal with really hardcore emergency, horrible situations. But after about 15 years, I was starting to lose that edge, and it was starting to really impact me in a way that I thought I really need a change. But that's how I met my husband. He was a respiratory therapist too. So
Well, there you go.
yeah.
That's awesome.
So tell us about your private practice then. When did you decide that it was time to go out on your own? And what was that transition like? Because going from a position where you're working for somebody else and all you really have to do is show up and do the work, rather than opening your own practice, is a huge, huge step.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it was scary. I spent about 7 years or so in community mental health. You're kind of a jack of all trades. You're sort of like a chess piece that they kind of move. I worked for a rather large community mental health that covered several regions. And so they had a lot going on, and they would just kind of move you around wherever they needed you to go. I did a lot of testing. I did a whole lot of IQ testing. I did special education testing. I remember testing for disability, doing Rorschachs,
Wow.
achievement testing, all kinds of stuff like that, and writing up, getting the reports written up and all that. So I did that for about 7 years. I really did special education testing in about 7 different school systems.
Oh, wow.
And the thing of it is, I learn quickly and I get bored quickly. And so, no joke, some of the IQs that I did after a while, I would finish them and I had no memory of actually doing them because I think I just dissociated.
Yeah.
Once you've done something hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, I just don't happen to be that kind of person that can do that. Now, there's some people they love that. They love the repetition. They love the familiarity. They love knowing what's going to happen next. And that's amazing for those type of individuals. I don't happen to be one of those. And I'm like, once I've learned it and I've grasped it, I'm ready to move on and learn something else. So I did that for about 7 years and then went into private practice. It was scary, but in a way, kind of getting back to my faith a little bit, I just kind of trust, and I'm like, this is what I feel led to do, so I'm just going to do it. I'm the kind of person that will just jump and figure it out on the way down. And so it is scary, but I'm also comfortable with making mistakes. And a lot of that gets back to boundaries, which we can talk about a little bit later. Is like, I know I'm going to make mistakes. I try to figure it out as best I can, try to, limit the number of mistakes I'm going to make, but I know I'm going to make them and I'm comfortable with that. And so, because we learn so much from the mistakes that we make, and I'm not scared of mistakes. And so going into the private practice, I had to teach myself a lot. And sometimes when you look back, there's a tendency to want to think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that, or I can't believe I did this, or if I'd have only known what I know now, I could have helped that person better. But you know what? We're all on a journey. We're all
Mhm.
on a path. I mean, yeah, right now I know more than I did 15 years ago, but you know what? I don't know as much as I'm going to know 15 years from now.
Exactly.
And we're all on that point of the journey. So we just have to just own wherever you are and
Mhm.
just lean into it, pull that in, accept it, and just keep learning.
Mhm.
And that's just kind of what I did.
Well, thanks for saying that about the mistakes and making mistakes, because I know that a lot of us, and I used to be one of them, will just beat ourselves up so badly, when they make a mistake or screw up. And mistakes are actually a hidden gem. They're kind of like
Mhm.
a gift, because every mistake you make is an incredible opportunity to learn more
100%. Yes.
about yourself, about what you're doing. So I find that really, I changed my whole mindset around making mistakes, which is a good thing because I do make a lot of them, as we all do.
Well, and if you're going to be trying new things, you're going to
Yeah.
make mistakes. And so what are your options? I mean, for me personally, it was either jump out and try something new and
Mhm.
be exposed to something new and have that adventure and have that new frontier, or stay in the same thing, doing the same thing every day, every day, every day. I would have scraped my face off. I cannot I cannot do that. I have to be the one that's out. But like I said, everybody's different.
Mhm.
So wherever anybody is on their journey, that's
Mhm.
okay. You don't have to be like the other people.
Mhm. And trying new things is really difficult because it puts you so far out of your comfort zone. And I think that's
Mm.
what keeps a lot of people back from wanting to take that next step to try something new or different. The fear of, number one, how many mistakes am I going to make? Or, the fear of failure, or just getting out of your comfort zone is so difficult for so many people, including me. Do you have any tips or any advice, somebody who is like, right on that precipice? It's like, I want to take that step, that next step forward to try something new, but they just can't find that courage or that ability to just go ahead and do it. It's like something is holding them back to take that step.
Hmm. Yeah, sure. A couple of things come to mind. One of them is do your homework.
Mm,
Look into the situation. Don't just blindly jump off a cliff. You have to research it out because
mhm,
maybe it's not a particularly good choice for them right at that moment.
mhm,
So do the homework. Once you've done the homework, you've collected the information, you've done the research, get on Google, check things out, ask people that you know that are in the field or whatever it is that you're wanting to
mhm,
do that you're thinking about. Ask people that are already doing that. What is it like? And ask different people because you might run into one person that has some issues going on that don't have anything
mhm,
to do with the job. And
mhm,
so, and also once you've collected a lot of information, get people around you that are supportive so that when you fall, and you will,
mhm,
you've got people there that can come alongside and nurture you. You've got
mhm,
girlfriends or guys or whatever that can like take you out for a drink or take you out fishing or whatever your thing is to
mhm,
calm your spirit down. If you
mhm,
have a faith in something, that's also something that can give you stability. There's lots of
mhm,
different faiths out there, lots of different
mhm,
people going down different paths. That's something else that can give you some stability. But psychologically, at the end of the day, once you've done all these things, once you've done your homework, you have your support system and you're still scared, it's almost like standing on, well, okay, so I'll tell you a story here in just a minute that
okay.
will explain what I'm getting ready to say. But it's almost like standing on a bridge
Mhm,
and you're wanting to jump off, not to do any kind of suicidal thing, but as
mhm,
sort of a metaphor for launching.
mhm,
And it's scary. And it's
mhm,
like, okay, what's it going to take to do that? You know, Once you do something like that, you are going to make mistakes, but
mhm,
what's your life going to be like if you don't?
mhm,
And I frequently like to say to my patients, it's like use the word and. So like, well,
mhm,
what if, and I'm going to get back to the what if here in just a minute, but what if
mhm,
I, do this and it doesn't work out right? Okay. And what
mhm,
if it doesn't? What then? What do you do?
mhm,
You're going to do something else. You're going to solve the problem. Just and okay, what if this happens with as I'm grinding and wringing my hands? What if this happens? Okay, what if it does happen? Answer
mhm,
that. That's a question, right? What if is a question. So answer it.
mhm,
What
mhm,
if that happens? Okay, what are you going to do? But see, keep in mind, you've already done your homework. You're not going to be blindsided probably if you've done your homework well, you've reached out to different people. So the likelihood that you're going to be just totally, smacked in the face and blindsided with something is very small. But yeah, things are going to happen that you don't know about. And like, I'm scared. What are you scared of? So that's something else. I'm scared is very ambiguous. It's very vague. What exactly are you scared of? What do you think is going to happen? Because clearly you think something is going to happen or you wouldn't be scared. So what exactly do you think is going to happen? And then what if it does? What are you going to do about that? And okay. And something else with the what ifing is that we frequently say, what if, and we fill it in with something really bad. Well, what ifing is about the future, or we wouldn't be asking the question. We'd already know, right? So what if is about the future. Well, if you think about the future is like something is the present that hasn't happened yet, correct? The future is just the present that hasn't happened yet. So if you were to think about the present, we do have some negative things in the present, but we also have a lot of positive things, true? So if you're going to launch into the future and pull something back, does it make any sense that everything that somebody pulls back to add into that what if question is negative? That makes no logical sense. So a homework assignment that I frequently give my patients is, okay, for every time that you say what if and end it with something negative, which that could happen. I can't say it won't, right? But you have to add balance by saying, okay, what if, and end it with something positive. Like somebody could say, well, what if I try this new business and I fall on my face? Well, that might happen, right? We can all be honest and say that might happen. Okay. But what if you try this new business and you surprisingly are an amazing success? You can't promise me that's not going to happen. So it's balancing out the what ifing.
Okay, so now I think that my favorite word in all the world is now going to be and.
And
I love that, because what you're doing is you're creating like a scenario where your what ifs and turn into little pathways. So you've got all of these new pathways that you're creating, that what can happen. Well, what if I become so successful, I don't know what to do. I'll have to hire some people. I'll have to have this incredible income. What would I do with all of this money? Would I buy a new house? So you can really start using your imagination and creating scenarios that are so powerful and positive that actually your brain is taking in that message, and that can help make things happen.
100%, because you're what ifing because you don't know the answer. If you knew the answer, you wouldn't be asking the question. So as long as you're just making stuff up, because that's what you're doing. If you're what if and you fill in the blank with something negative, you're just making stuff up. You don't even know. So as long as you're making stuff up, you might as well make up something positive to go along with the mix. That's all I'm saying.
So so the other thing that goes hand in hand with that is I'm talking about the power of your imagination and visualization. Because your brain actually is recording these messages, whether they're negative or positive. So the more positive messages you can send, the better outcome you would probably have.
Well, and I love the fact that you brought that up, because there's actually a part of our brain, which I'm sure you're aware of this with your background, the amygdala and the hippocampus. Okay, that part of our brain is actually where the fight or flight is held. And it's also where a lot of our trauma is held. That part of our brain does not respond to logic. But what it does respond to is experience and visual image. So lots of times when we are feeling very emotional, we're scared. We know logically this may or may not happen, but it feels like it might. We're scared. That's emotional. So when we can create visual images in our mind, then we can speak to that part of our brain that's carrying around that fear. Whereas a logical response will not make any difference at all.
Right. That is actually how I got my first level black belt, was through visualization. Because I was so terrified. I was doing okay, going up through the ranks slowly, of course. I started training at the age of 47, it's a crazy story. But when it came time for that first level black belt, it was nothing but random attacks. From first, you had to defend yourself against one attacker, then two attackers, then three attackers all at the same time coming at you with, you didn't even know what they were coming at you with. It could have been, fists, weapons, kicks, grabs, chokes. You just didn't know. So you had to respond appropriately. And I had the skills by that time. I was very well trained. I had the skills, but I just could not wrap my head around that. I couldn't. And after about 6 months of even my partners were getting frustrated with me. It's like, just do it. You have the skills. So I thought, okay, I had to try a different tact. So I stopped training my body and I started training my mind. And I just had to do that power of visualization, starting with something that wasn't quite so scary with just one attacker, a simple attack. And I would move through that and kind of, okay, this is how I will feel, sense, touch. This is, what I'm hearing, him screaming for mercy, and then I would just keep on going up until finally, after 6 weeks, I was ready to do it. And I did it.
That's awesome. That's exactly what we're talking about. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Huge power of visualization, mental images.
I get really geeky about the brain. I love neuroplasticity and talking about that. I think it's just so powerful. So there's another little tweak to this that I wanted to ask you about, because I think some people might even be afraid of success. So it's like, okay, but what if I become so successful? I have never seen myself as being successful, or I'm afraid of my power. I'm afraid of my success. I'm afraid of my potential. Is that a real thing? And how do you
It
address
is a real
that?
thing. Yes, it is a real thing. Well, to add some other coping strategies along with it, you can do what if that does happen, and what do you do? What do you do? But sometimes that fear just still lingers around. So sometimes it's helpful to go, well, is it happening right now? Is whatever you're afraid of, is it happening to you right this minute? And if it's not your reality. Because the thing of it is, we change and we learn and we grow. And so by the time, if that person ends up becoming very successful, by the time they're successful, they will have gone through several gauntlets where they will be able to handle it then with skills they don't have today. So they can't imagine today how they would handle it then. But they're not the person today that they will be then. So the question becomes, whatever it is that you're afraid of, is it happening to you right now? And if it's not, it is not your reality.
And that's a perfect analogy of what was happening to me with the black belt. So thank you for that. So now let's talk about the boundaries queen. I love that, because you are the sassy psychotherapist and the queen of boundaries.
Yes.
You have some wonderful aliases. I'm wondering, have you bought that URL?
Well, I'm not the sassy psychotherapist. I've bought the queen of boundaries. I had the boundaries queen and the queen of boundaries. Yes.
Good for you. I'm so glad you did that. So how did that come about? Because boundaries are so important, and I think so many of us are so bad at them.
Oh my gosh. I am so passionate about boundaries, and I feel like I know it down to my bone marrow. So the first thing was kind of getting back to what I said earlier about being raised in a situation with a parent who struggled with several mental illnesses, and they were significant. And so part of that dynamic was she had issues with boundaries and enmeshment and manipulation. There was a lot of manipulative things going on. There was some narcissistic things going on. And when you're kind of growing up in that, and again, that wasn't everything. Please don't, I don't want to communicate. I mean, my mother had a lot of wonderful qualities, and she was super smart. She was an RN. And, and I have a lot of wonderful memories involving her. But like I said earlier, anyone, for example, that has an alcoholic parent would understand they do have a lot of fantastic memories. And sometimes they feel guilty talking about the other stuff because they do have the wonderful memories too. So,
Mhm.
but the fact of the matter is, though, it is you have to go through that, and so trying to navigate those waters of a dynamic where there's a lot of manipulation, there's narcissism, there's enmeshment,
Mm.
the boundaries were really shaky in order to survive.
Mhm.
If I didn't learn about boundaries and put them in place, which I didn't learn how to
Mhm.
do that till I was like out of college, well
Mhm.
into my adult years,
Mhm.
you I would have just been annihilated.
Mhm.
I wouldn't have been able to survive it, and the rest of my
Mhm.
relationships would have crumbled
Mhm.
because everything would have been sucked up and wrapped up in that one dysfunctional, what I call dysfunction dance. I would have
Mhm.
been just sucked into this one dysfunction dance that I wouldn't have been able to get out of, and that would have impacted all my other relationships.
Mhm.
And then when I started into private practice, I started hearing just day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, how pervasive boundary issues
Mhm.
are and how they seem to be the cause, the origin
Mhm.
of so much anxiety and so
Mhm.
many relationship issues, that I just started seeing it so much that I started noticing that I wasn't getting out of a day of
Mhm.
psychotherapy appointments without bringing up boundaries at least once or twice.
Mhm.
And I wasn't doing that on purpose. I wasn't trying to see boundary
Mhm.
issues, but
Mhm.
they were just, I was just looking at the person's whole story and looking at all the pieces and going, wow, this is really okay. If we can get them with some healthy boundaries, a lot of this goes away.
Mhm.
And so that's why I started becoming more and more and more passionate about
Mhm.
boundaries and teaching people about what that means, and
Mhm.
and how to fix that and how to do that. And it's
Mhm.
just, I just haven't stopped, and I don't intend to stop.
Mhm. Good. I'm certainly glad to hear that because once you do figure out how to set strong boundaries, healthy boundaries, and stick to them, I mean, magic happens. It's almost like, somebody takes a 50-pound weight off of your shoulders.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I have a funny story about boundaries, if I can share it with you. One of my good friends in physical therapy school, and I hung around with people who were about 13 years younger than me. So I was in my late 30s when I got into PT school. And she, a lovely lady, but she would freak out all the time. She was always concerned, and she's, oh, you're so smart, I'm so stupid, I'm never going to get all this information. So after being in school all day long from 8 to 5, I would sit and I would kind of tutor her for a couple of hours on whatever it was that we were studying that day. And then she'd say, oh, okay, I feel so much better now. And I would go home and try and study, but I was exhausted. What I did
Exhaust.
not know is that she would go home and she would study some more. And I found out at the end of the term, the end of the quarter, that her grades were better than mine. And I thought,
Oh.
okay, you're on your own. This is, and then after graduation and going forward, and she had such poor boundaries and she was in therapy. And she had a Christian therapist who recommended this one book on boundaries that was based on scripture. And she says,
Mhm.
she felt that my friend would read it because it was scripture based and stuff. So not only did she buy the book, she bought a copy for me because she told me, she says, I don't think you have very good boundaries either. And I thought, well, you have a really good point there, thinking about our relationship. So she actually wrote in the, in the book to Cheryl, maybe you can read this book and let me know what the take home message is.
That's priceless.
Isn't that amazing? It's like she wants me to do her therapy homework. I
So,
can't believe this. It
oh
was
no.
hilarious. But as I was reading the book, it was like, oh my goodness, this is so and so. This is so and so. This is me. And I would read these certain pieces to my husband, and he'd say, that's your friend so and so. That's your friend so and so. Oh my gosh, that's you. And it was amazing how this was just unveiling. And when I told my friend about that, I says, yeah, I saw you on this page, and I was on this page, and my other friend was on it. And she says, I don't see myself in any of that. And I says, oh, that's interesting. So she went back and told her therapist that. And her therapist said, keep reading, keep reading.
That's awesome. Well, people will see what they want to see.
It is true. It is true. Yeah.
So from what you're describing, you were in a position where you were very open to that information and you were open to seeing yourself and others demonstrated in those pages, but she was not in a place where she was allowing
Right.
herself to see anything.
Well, I was very open and receptive to it because I had like 2 or 3 people all at the same time who were pretty much sucking the life out of me. And,
Mm,
I had nothing left to give. And so it was like, this is part of my problem. So I
yes,
thought it was just magical. So boundaries are magical.
they are magical.
Hmm.
100%. They're
Hmm.
magic.
They can
Mhm.
change your life in an instant once you learn how to do it. But I was thinking about when you're mentioning, as a child growing up in that environment, and then finally in college and learning how to set good boundaries. Is it possible to teach children boundaries at a young age? I mean, I think it would be, but when you're talking about a situation where there's, some dysfunction in the family,
Mhm.
is it possible to do that?
That's a very good question, Cheryl, because the answer is yes,
Hmm.
but okay.
Hmm.
It's important to teach younger children, especially boundaries about their bodies,
Hmm.
what's appropriate touch and not appropriate touch. They have a right to say no
Hmm.
and this type of thing. And so teaching the younger children, well, for example, one example of a boundary would be their bedroom,
Hmm.
that they have a right to their bedroom and
Hmm.
there's a door
Hmm.
and that this is my space, it's not your space. Or like if they're going to the bathroom,
Hmm.
I'm in the bathroom, I'm going to shut the door and
Hmm.
I don't want someone walking in on me when I'm in the bathroom. Okay. But what's also true is that, especially younger children, they
Hmm.
may be in a family dynamic that doesn't practice healthy boundaries, and they cannot change that. They don't
Hmm.
have control over that. And so many times, if the family, and this, unfortunately, this doesn't happen enough, but
Hmm.
if the whole family would be willing to engage in family therapy and understand, so that the mom and the dad and the siblings and everybody can understand about boundaries and how to respect one
Hmm.
another. And at the same time, the parents have authority over
Hmm.
just because a younger child knows about boundaries doesn't mean that he or she can walk around doing whatever he or she wants. That's different from adult to adult boundaries
Hmm.
because of the authority, the power dynamic.
Hmm.
But unfortunately, in most situations, if a child needs to be trained in this, it's because the parents haven't,
Hmm.
because the situation is such that the parents don't recognize, or maybe don't even want to recognize, their
Hmm.
dysfunction, and they have custody.
Hmm.
So unless something goes really, really bad, and unfortunately right now the foster care system is so overloaded
Hmm.
that a child practically has to be on the verge of being murdered before they'll be taken out of the home, because there's nowhere to put them. Because
Hmm.
there's a strong need for more foster families to step up and be willing to be a safe place for these children to
Hmm.
go, while the parents can possibly, hopefully, get their act together. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Hmm.
But it's like, the question you're asking is a tough one for the reasons that I've just described.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It's so complicated and so complex. And, as a provider, it must be really frustrating and difficult when you see situations like that.
Well, I don't, because I don't see young children.
Mm.
And
Mm.
this is one of the reasons, because
Mm.
it's not, when you have a young child, it's not
Mhm.
frequently that young child is being scapegoated. I actually
Mm.
attended family therapy myself when I was younger with my
Uh-huh.
family, and we only went one time, but it made a wonderful impression on me because the therapist was listening and he was asking a lot of questions and he listened to
Mhm.
all of us answer them. And then he verbalized back and he said out loud what I had been living, what I couldn't say. He said it
Yeah.
out loud. And I think that too, getting back to why I went into psychology, I think
Mhm.
that too, it was such a wonderful, just validating experience to
Mhm.
hear the therapist say out loud what I knew was going on, but I couldn't say it out loud or bad things would happen.
Right. Do you have any siblings?
Yes,
And
I,
so where are you in the birth order?
I'm the oldest.
Ah.
He is 8 years younger than me. And ironically, he is a clinical pharmacist. who, by the way, got the Boris Francis Organic Chemistry Award. I told him, I think mom slept with someone else. I don't see
Yeah.
how we're genetically related. Because not only did he do well in not just chemistry,
Mhm.
but organic chemistry, which we all know is the devil of all chemistries,
Mhm.
and got
Mhm.
an award for it. I'm thinking, how are you even genetically related to me? I don't see how we can be. But yes, that's my brother. I love him to death. And to this day, we are very close. And I just love him beyond the beyond because we both experienced it
Mhm.
together. So
Mhm.
he knows things that other people, they might kind of understand it intellectually, but they
Mhm.
didn't live it.
Right.
And so
Right.
we're very, very tight.
Mhm. Wow. I'm still blown away by the organic chemistry and
I
the
know.
that's just incredible. Wow.
I don't see how. But yeah, somehow we're genetically related. Isn't that interesting?
It is very interesting. Yeah. Well, I have four sisters, and so we're all. They used to say that I was the adopted one, and I'm like, have you looked at my face? Don't think so. But yeah, so we have all different interests and skill sets, let's just say.
Yeah.
But the funniest thing, the two that were voted least likely to get into college, let alone finish, was my oldest sister and me. And we are the only two out of the five that actually ended up getting master's degrees. So figure that one out.
And you have two. So
Well,
you
I just
got
have,
your the
well, my
respiratory
my my
therapy.
respiratory therapy, that's my undergrad, so that's my bachelor's degree. But my PT is a master's. So, and my sister got her, she's a teacher, and she got her master's in some kind of reading specialty. And she hates to read, and she never reads.
That's it's funny how things turn out.
Yes. And it's funny how, the internal family systems, that's something that you also talk about, which is kind of what you
Oh,
explained with your mom. And yeah, I mean, it's so complex. And it's so funny because a lot of these patterns that are established in families, even with larger, where there are more children at a very young age, follow you your entire life and they just don't change.
but it doesn't, but you can.
Right.
You can
Oh, yes.
change with your boundaries.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's interesting because when you're talking about the dance, the dysfunction dance or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
I finally realized, and I was probably 50 at the time. It was right around that time when I would go home because, I live out here and I'd go home to outside of Pittsburgh for family events and functions and stuff. And I would come back so cranky and exhausted and so ticked off. It's like, I'm never going home again. And then I finally realized that if I just stepped back and pretended I was taking a movie or watching a movie and then, kind of like detached myself a little bit. And so I tried that the next time I went home. And every time somebody pressed my buttons, it was like the music is playing, but I'm not going to dance. And I never did. And
Love
I
that.
stopped giving the response and the reaction that was typical or what they were expecting. And it was just the frustration on their faces were delicious.
See, that's part of setting boundaries that's very,
Mm-hmm.
very important is understanding that when you begin to set healthy boundaries with people who are unhealthy,
Mm-hmm.
they don't like it in general.
Mm-hmm.
And so they don't respond well. And so part of the training is helping people to know what to do, how to respond whenever they get pushback. And they
Mm-hmm.
will.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be pushback.
At about the same time, this, and it must have been because of the book that my friend had given me. I was, that boundaries book. Um, but I had a very good friend, a best friend that I'd been friends with for over 30 years, very, very close. And it got to the point that I had to break up with her.
Mm,
And
yeah.
how do you tell somebody you've been best and dearest friends with for 30 years that you haven't liked them for the past 15 and have been
Mm.
trying to figure out how to break up with them for the past 10? In walk strong, healthy boundaries. And, so I just kind of had to do it. And it was such a relief because it had turned into such a toxic toxic relationship.
Well, and I'm so glad you pointed that out, Cheryl, because I'm going to give an example of what I call the noose. Okay. This is part of I'm creating an online boundaries course, and we can talk about that later. But basically, using your example, technically, when you're going to break up with someone or you're going to end a relationship, you can explain why if you want to. That's your choice, but you don't have to. And here's the thing, with someone who's dysfunctional, the more you justify to them, you're trying to justify your choice as if you're asking for their permission or something like that. The more justification you give them, it's like you're handing them rope. Okay. And the more rope you hand them, they're going to take all that information and they're going to fashion it into a noose and they're going to hang you with it, because you give them all your justification and they're going to take it and they're going to turn it on you. Let me give you a very simple example. Like say you were part of an organization and they needed you to be in charge of something and you didn't want to be. You didn't want to do it. And so you started saying things like, well, I'm just having trouble with childcare right now. And I just can't really, I'm trying to keep up with my kids and I just can't do it. And you start giving and they go, okay, well, tell you what, I'll hire a babysitter to watch your kids. So they essentially took your rope and created a noose and hung you with it. So the now you're standing there like, well, what am I going to say now? Because they just took my excuse and turned it back on me. You do not have to give reasons for your choices. You can if you want to, but the more you try to justify your boundaries to someone who is trying to manipulate you, you are giving them ammunition to try to turn it around on you to get you to still do what they want you to do. You have the right to just say, I'm not interested in that, but I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll see you later. And then you walk off. See, that's not hateful. That's not confrontational. People have this idea that setting boundaries is something that is loud and obnoxious and mean and hateful. No, no, no. It's none of those things. As a matter of fact, some of the most relaxed and peaceful people I know are the ones that have very firm boundaries and they know exactly where they are and they feel very confident in setting their boundaries. And because of that, they don't feel a reason to get upset, to raise their voice, because the other person's reaction is simply irrelevant. How the other person hears what they're saying is not their issue. Their issue is how they speak. And they're going to say yes or they're going to say no. And that's that. And they know they don't have to say, well, because this or because that. Nope. Just like, I'm not interested. I wish you well. I hope you have a good day. I'll see you tomorrow. And then they walk away. That was very calm. That was very kind. But that's when you're really good at setting your boundaries. That's what you can do. And you don't step into that noose.
So as you were explaining this, I swear I heard a choir of angels begin to sing. And what you're describing too, I mean, it's a form of respect. It's a form of self-respect as well as respecting the other person. And it's not supposed to be confrontational. I mean, it could be a conversation. I actually just did the let's not even talk about this. I just kind of walked away, which was it was a very interesting time. But it's so funny because it was that friend and my other friend who had given me the book on boundaries, both at about the same time this was happening. It's like, I got to, get rid of this. And the way that my one friend from the 30-year relationship reacted and the way that my other friend reacted and responded to this, she and I are still friends. We still have a close friendship. And so she was able to hear and understand, what I was saying. I just was like, we need to cool it. I don't think I want to, spend any more time with you right about now. And a couple of days later, she came back and she says, you know what, I understand. I respect your wishes and blah, blah, blah. Let's still be friends and, talk in a couple of months. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful. So
well, I tell people, it's like, this is kind of an odd example, but it works. So you don't normally walk around thinking about your throat, do you?
No.
I mean, have you thought about your throat a whole lot today so far?
Well, actually, I kind of do because I have a little bit of dystonia, but it's under control, so I don't think about it all the time.
Well, but you're thinking about it because you're noticing something's wrong
Hmm.
with the dystonia.
Hmm.
So, like if we had that or we had strep throat where
Hmm.
something's wrong, then we're noticing it.
Hmm.
Well, that's the same way with boundaries and relationships. When you are in a relationship with someone who has healthy boundaries, you don't think about boundaries. You don't have to because they're
Hmm.
naturally being respected. They're respecting yours, you're respecting theirs, like that example that you just gave. You
Hmm.
start thinking about boundaries when you're in a relationship with someone, whether it's a personal, whether it's a work relationship, whether it's romantic, whatever the case may be, when that person is not respecting your boundaries. Maybe they don't know how to respect boundaries. Maybe
Hmm.
they're dysfunctional themselves for different reasons and they're trying
Hmm.
to mesh with you. Maybe they're trying to
Hmm.
manipulate you.
Hmm.
When that's going on, then you become acutely aware that something's wrong.
Hmm.
And then you're like, okay, I've got to do something about this. Then you become aware of boundaries
Hmm.
because of the dysfunction.
Hmm. And if you don't set the boundaries, the situation just gets worse.
Yes.
And you're even more deeply enmeshed or entwined and stuck. And it's
Yeah.
harder and harder then to set the boundaries. So this is a perfect segue for you to start telling us about. You said something about starting or building an online program for
Yes.
boundaries, which,
Yes.
again, those angels, I can hear them singing again because we all need more boundaries. And I think if each and every single one of us would have healthy boundaries, I believe the world would be a better place.
Oh, girl, 100%.
Hmm.
100%. Yes.
Hmm. So tell us about the online program. How soon is it going to be available?
Well, I'm working on it now because there's some people that they don't want to do therapy, but they really would
Yeah.
like to learn more about boundaries. And so I'm trying to because I've got my private practice going, and then I have my
Hmm.
podcast going, and so this is like
Hmm.
a third thing that I've got going. I'm putting together now. I'm getting ready to record 14 modules, teaching
Ooh.
modules. And what it's going to do is that whoever purchases the course now, this is the end. When we're recording this, it's the end of
Hmm.
August, so I'm
Hmm.
hoping to be able to have this all together and on my website available probably by maybe the end of September, the 1st of October.
Wow.
Okay, so it takes a minute to get it all together. I've got a consulting firm that's working with me, rebranding, doing all kinds of fun stuff, but it's going to be 14 modules. So basically, when someone purchases the course, each week they'll have two of my modules to watch with
Hmm.
corresponding exercises to complete that I've
Hmm.
created. And
Hmm.
then I'm going to meet with a group. It's going to
Hmm.
be the course is going to be like a group course. I'm
Hmm.
going to meet with them online, like in a Zoom kind of
Hmm.
scenario,
Hmm.
once a week.
Hmm.
So we're going to be all there so they can come and they can bring their concerns. If they say, I don't understand this, or I tried this and it
Hmm.
didn't work, or what advice do you have
Hmm.
about this? So we can all talk together for about 90 minutes
Hmm.
once a week in a group scenario. And then the next week they'll watch two more modules, do the
Hmm.
exercises, then we'll come together. So it'll be 7 week course
Hmm.
that we're going to do. And that's the first thing. I think this is going to be the beginning of many
Hmm.
things that I'm going to be offering,
Hmm.
but that this is kind of like the seminal course that I'm going to be offering, like I said, probably the end of September or into October.
You are on fire. That's all I have to say about that. And again, that brings me to another segue of your podcast, which is called, oh my gosh, where is this? It's in my notes here. What
it's
is your
it's Phoenix and Flame.
Phoenix and Flame? So
Uh-huh.
tell us about the podcast because I find this fascinating how it came about of teaching boundaries
Mhm.
to your church, members of your church. And so how did that come about that all of a sudden this light bulb went off in your head and it was like, okay, I think I need to do a podcast about this.
That's Cheryl. That is so funny. I was teaching the boundaries courses and doing just fine. But again, like I said, I kind of get bored. I got to
Mm-hmm.
keep changing stuff up. At the time, I really didn't even know what a podcast was. And this was about two. 2019,
Uh-huh.
18, 19.
Uh-huh.
And I'm not embarrassed to say that I didn't really know. Okay. So, but it was, and I had really a heart for people who don't like churchy stuff. They
Mm-hmm.
don't like churchy people. They don't like
Mm-hmm.
churchy talk. They don't, but I wanted to be able to reach those
Mm-hmm.
individuals. And so I just felt myself kind of turning away from wanting to teach the courses in my church. I still love my church, they're awesome, but my heart
Mm-hmm.
is for those that don't have a church and they're not really attracted to anything church
Mm-hmm.
related. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it started just trying to learn. I had to teach myself from ground zero all
Mm-hmm.
about what a podcast is, what material that you need. We talked earlier, we were laughing about the technology. Oh my gosh. I mean, I will say so many times along this path, I don't know how many times, it felt like somebody had, like I was walking along a path
Mm-hmm.
and it felt like somebody put the palm of their hand in the small of my back and shoved me down,
Mm-hmm.
and my face landed in a big old mud puddle,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just lay there in the mud.
Uh-huh.
And at first, I would get right up and just wipe it all off and keep going. But after that happens 2 or 3 times, 5, 6, 10 times, then
Yeah.
you just lay in the mud. Like, I think I'm just going to stay here in the mud. I just don't think I want to get up anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But then eventually, I got tired of lying in the mud. And then I would eventually stand back up again and keep going, because basically I felt like this was God leading me. And I made him a promise. I
Mm-hmm.
said, I can only promise you one thing, just one thing. I promise I won't quit.
Mm-hmm.
I won't quit. I said, I'm going to be face down in this mud puddle so many times because I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on. I don't know the answer. And I'm mad. And I literally, I have cried. I've screamed. I've thrown
Mm-hmm.
things.
Mm-hmm.
I've gone through the gamut of all
Mm-hmm.
of this. But what I have not done
Just
is
quit.
quit.
Mm-hmm.
So I just keep going. And so then that's how the podcast kind of happened. And at the same time, I was having a heart for people who were trying to get mental health assistance. Because see, 2020 is when the pandemic all started.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about the same time that I launched my podcast. Well, the mental health field, they started doing telehealth,
Mm-hmm.
and we were inundated. Because people, and thankfully they were reaching out for help. They were stuck at
Right.
home, they were having
Yeah.
all those pandemic issues. Oh, they didn't know what to do. Well, what happened was we would have waiting lists months long,
Wow.
and people were having trouble getting access to help. So the first 4 episodes of my podcast are just
Mm-hmm.
about boundaries.
Wow.
Episodes 1, 2, 3, and 4 are just describing boundary issues, and then I go into some other things about anxiety issues, and it goes on and on. But the basic tagline is pushing through and transforming even when you feel like a pile of ash.
Mm-hmm. I saw that.
That's what Phoenix and Flame is about. So
Right.
that's kind of how all that got started, and the transformation of it until now.
That's so funny because I was dragged into podcasting too. And when it first happened, it was like, that's interesting. I don't know what a podcast is. I don't know why I would possibly want one.
Yeah.
People have told me I should look into it because I'd be good at it. And there was a lady in town who was actually starting her own platform with nothing but female podcasters. And I used to follow her and listen to her radio show. And I thought, she's starting this contest. Maybe if I enter the contest, maybe I'll learn a little bit about podcasting along the way if I ever decide I want to do one. And maybe I'll get to meet her in person someday. So I was in the mud, face down, real deep for about 8 weeks as we went through this contest. And I thought, I can't do this. The technology, just talking to this blank screen, I wonder what all those squiggly lines mean.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I can look at it like a ventilator pattern, like a respiratory, it was just such a nightmare. And of course, I did not win the contest. But I did get to meet her and I did get to be on the platform for a while. So that's basically how I started. But there were so many times it was like, I can't do this. I'm just going to quit.
Mm-hmm.
But I couldn't wrap my head around quitting. I said to myself, you will hate yourself if you quit. And that was exactly 18 years ago. 18 years. Oh my God. No, it was 2018.
Okay.
So it just popped up on my Facebook page, like as a memory of the picture of all of us women who were doing the podcast. So it's like, my goodness, that was,
Oh,
2000. It's been 4 years. Isn't that
wow.
crazy?
It's crazy how time flies like that.
It
100%.
it really is. So tell the audience where they can find your podcast.
Okay, you can go to phoenixandflame.com.
Mhm.
Now,
Okay.
by the time this airs, it hopefully by then, because like I mentioned earlier, I'm working with a consultant group and the website and everything is being revamped and
Uh-huh.
they're revamping my social media platform. So everything's like under construction right now.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes out on the other side, it's going to be the bomb. So
Mm-hmm.
hopefully when that happens, when this airs, then they can go to phoenixandflame.com, and also the boundaries courses will be sitting there
Right.
if they would like to
Right.
take any of the courses.
I have all the confidence in the world by the time this thing airs. All of that will be done. You'll have your new website, you'll have all your new social, everything will be done. So we're good. We're good to go.
Awesome.
Where else can people find you? Give us a few more of your social media links if you want. They will be on the show notes, but I really like to have my guest be able to tell the audience where they can find them and connect with
Mm-hmm.
them. It just adds that
Well,
little bit of warmth.
it does. Unfortunately, right now, that's a weakness of mine. That's one of the things that I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the the Facebook page, there's a Phoenix and Flame Facebook page,
Mm-hmm.
and my consultant, because that's I said earlier about mistakes and weak areas. And to be honest, the social media has been a weaker area of mine. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to get better at that, and I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to.
Mm-hmm.
So I do have a Facebook page of Phoenix and Flame
Okay.
on that. But I'm going to have, that's going to be, by the time this airs, that's going to be much better. And I'm going to have
Mm-hmm.
other things as well. So
Mm-hmm.
at this point, that's kind of where that stands.
Okay. And you're on LinkedIn as well, aren't you?
I am. And also, if somebody goes to phoenixandflame.com, there's also a contact me. If a
Ah.
listener wants to ask me a question or make a comment, or they need to have a connection with me, they
Mm-hmm.
can, contact me through that.
Mm-hmm.
I also have an email, just my name, Dana, Dana, Skaggs,
Mm-hmm.
Skaggs at phoenixandflame.com.
Okay.
That is an email that comes straight to me.
Okay.
So this is a way that I'm trying to build that way to have that connection
Mm-hmm.
with the listeners where they
Mm-hmm.
feel like they have that bond. And we can
Mm-hmm.
also, I get feedback from people, things they would like to hear.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I'm putting out there what they want to hear.
Well, after people listen to this episode, I have a funny feeling you're going to be getting a lot of emails regarding the boundaries because that is just so important and it's life changing. It's a game changer.
Yes, it is. 100%. It changes virtually everything about your life.
So, do you have, I think you probably do, but at this point, just like one final pearl of wisdom, like the thing that is most important if people are listening to this and they're thinking about everything that we talked about, which was a lot of different subjects that we covered. But of course, you know what my favorite one was. So, what final pearl of wisdom could you leave with the audience right now before we sign off?
Mm, wow. Okay. If I could pick one thing, I would say practice not owning other people's issues. If it's somebody else's thoughts, if it's
Mhm.
somebody else's feelings, if it's somebody else's actions, then you did not cause those. You cannot control those and you cannot cure those. Doesn't mean they're not going to blame you. Okay. But that's
Mhm.
irrelevant. You're the one that
Mhm.
needs to know that their issues do not belong to you. So stop
Mhm.
owning other people's feelings. Stop
Mhm.
owning other people's behavior. That is theirs, that it belongs to them, and
Mhm.
that is in their yard. And that's in my first 4 episodes of Phoenix and Flame. But it's just stop. If I could give you one pearl, it would be practice not owning other people's issues. Get in your own yard, own your own stuff. Your own
Mhm.
thoughts, your own feelings, your own actions belong to you, and you have a right to those things. Don't let anybody take those things away from you. You
Mhm.
have a right to your own thoughts and feelings and your actions. Don't own other people's stuff. It's not
Mhm.
yours. Stop making it
Mhm.
all about you. It's not all about you. It's
Mhm.
their stuff.
Mhm. That is brilliant. I'm probably just going to keep listening to this. I'm going to put that part on a loop and just keep listening to it over and over and over again, because that is the best advice that I've heard in a long time. And it's absolutely spot on. So thank you. Dana, thank you
Cheryl.
so much for being here. I love talking to you. This has been a fantastic episode, and I really appreciate your wisdom and your time and your energy. And I am so looking forward to some of the other things that you're going to be doing moving forward. And I would love to help promote you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank
and
you
everybody,
so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And everybody, thank you for listening. And make sure you do check out the Phoenix and Flame podcast. Check out Dana's website, and keep an eye on her social media, which she's really going to be bumping up down the road. And just remember to establish strong boundaries. Healthy boundaries. It is a game changer, and your life will get so much better, so much richer, so much easier. And the funny thing happens once you do start setting really healthy boundaries, the people who are usually sucking your energy kind of go away, and a whole new group of beautiful, wonderful, respectful, energetic people seem to just show up right at your doorstep. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.